Have you ever experienced a coincidence so precise, so improbable, that it seemed loaded with a hidden meaning? Like when you think intensely about a person you haven't spoken to in years, and they call you at that very moment. Or when a symbol appears repeatedly in different places, as if the universe were trying to tell you something. Coincidence? Luck? Or is there something more? Carl Jung, one of the greatest figures in 20th century psychology, believed that these coincidences were not just the result of chance. He saw a different logic in them, a symbolic language of the unconscious that manifested itself through external events. That's how he coined the term synchronicity. This video is an invitation to explore this fascinating concept. We will understand what synchronicity is, how it arises, why it impacts our lives, and how it can be interpreted as a reflection of our psyche. The journey is profound, but also accessible and practical. So, take the opportunity to check if you are subscribed to the channel. And now let's take the first step towards this symbolic universe that lives behind coincidences. Carl Jung and the origin of synchronicity. To truly understand what Jung meant by synchronicity, it's important to take a step back and understand who he was, and why his ideas remain so relevant today. Carl Gustav Jung was a Swiss psychiatrist who collaborated with Freud in the early 20th century, but soon realized that their paths were headed in different directions. While Freud focused on the more rational and sexual aspects of the unconscious, Jung went further. He believed that there was a symbolic, collective, and even spiritual dimension to the human unconscious. For him, the mind was not just a machine that responded to stimuli. It was also a fertile field of meanings, archetypes, and myths. It was in this context that Jung began to notice unusual patterns between internal events, such as dreams, intuitions, or intense feelings, and external events which seemed to be connected by an invisible thread. But this thread was not causal, it was symbolic. And that's when the idea of synchronicity emerged. Coincidences that make sense, but have no logical explanation. This concept did not come out of nowhere. It emerged from his clinical observations and his interest in topics such as alchemy, Eastern spirituality, and modern physics. And it is precisely this unique combination of rationality and symbolism that makes synchronicity so rich and provocative. With that in mind, we can now delve deeper. After all, what exactly is synchronicity, and how does it manifest itself in our daily lives? What is synchronicity? Concept and real examples. By now, you've probably realized that synchronicity isn't just any coincidence. But what exactly did Jung mean by this term? According to him, synchronicity is the simultaneous occurrence of two or more events that are not connected by a cause and effect relationship, but that have a deep meaning for the person experiencing them. It is when the external world seems to mirror something internal, as if there were an invisible connection between what we feel and what happens around us. Jung believed that this was not a matter of chance, but rather an expression of the unconscious trying to communicate. Synchronicity, then, is like a bridge between the mind and the world, a symbolic bridge, not a causal one. It cannot be predicted, but when it happens, it usually has an immediate, emotional impact on us. It is as if everything, for a moment, makes a strange and mysterious sense. One of the most famous examples reported by Jung himself involves a patient who was going through a stagnant therapeutic process. One day, she told him about a dream in which she was given a golden scarab, a symbol of transformation and rebirth in Egyptian mythology. While she was telling the dream, an insect knocked on the office window. When Jung got up to see what it was, he found a golden beetle, practically identical to the one in the dream. He gave the insect to the patient, and from that moment on, she began to respond more openly to therapy. This story may seem like a stunning coincidence, but to Jung, it was a clear example of synchronicity. The insect didn't appear because of a dream. There was no cause and effect, but the symbolism involved, the emotional impact, and the timing of the event made it deeply meaningful. Another example, imagine that you are going through a period of doubt about which path to take. Suddenly, without you telling anyone, a friend recommends a book that talks exactly about the topic you are dealing with. You read the book, feel an intense identification, and it ends up helping you make an important decision. This sequence of events seems by chance, but the symbolic content may point to something deeper happening between you and the world around you. Jung was also interested in how this phenomenon seemed to transcend the boundaries of psychology. He even corresponded with Nobel Prize-winning theoretical physicist Wolfgang Pauli, who also observed symbolic patterns in dreams and believed in connections between mind and matter. Together, they explored the idea that reality might be structured in more complex ways than just cause and effect. For Jung, synchronicity was one of the ways in which the collective unconscious, a shared storehouse of symbols and archetypes, expressed itself in the real world. When someone resonates with certain deep contents of the unconscious, the universe seems to respond with signs. But these signs are not necessarily magical or supernatural. They are symbolic. They are coded messages that need to be interpreted, not deciphered like neat riddles. Therefore, it is important not to try to force synchronicities or see them in everything. Jung always warned against the risk of superstition or symbolic paranoia. The secret lies in listening carefully and being sensitive enough to notice when something really resonates with you. If the event is charged with emotion, if it appears at a delicate or decisive moment in your life, and if the symbol seems to call you, you may be facing a true synchronicity. That's where the beauty of the concept lies. It invites us to look at the world in a new way, not just as a set of causes and effects, but as a field of living meanings in constant dialogue with our consciousness. If this content has made sense to you so far, please like the video. This helps us continue producing content that connects psychology, self-knowledge, and symbolism in an accessible way. Now that you understand what synchronicity is, the big question is how to differentiate a simple coincidence from a true symbolic sign. Coincidence or sign. How to tell the difference. Now that we understand what synchronicity is, a natural question arises. How do we know when we are faced with a simple coincidence or a true sign with symbolic meaning? Not every unexpected encounter or curious event is necessarily a manifestation of the unconscious, and distinguishing these cases requires sensitivity and attention. The first important clue is emotional impact. When we encounter a synchronicity, we often feel that something special has happened. It may give us a thrill, a sense of immediate recognition, or even a sense that the universe has responded to something within us. It's not just interesting, it's meaningful. Emotion, in this case, is the first sign that the event has touched something deep. Another fundamental aspect is the moment in which the coincidence occurs. Synchronicities usually occur during periods of transition, crisis, or decision-making. These are times when we are more open to the unknown, more vulnerable, or more attentive to the meaning of life. In these phases, the unconscious tends to manifest itself more strongly, and the external world can reflect this in surprising ways. Think, for example, of someone who is considering moving to another city. For weeks, this idea has been developing internally, but there is still no concrete action. Then, on the same day, this person sees a news report about the desired city, meets an acquaintance who has just moved there, and hears a song that brings back memories of that region. Three unrelated elements, but which together seem to carry a message. It is in this symbolic chain that the synchronic potential resides. In addition to emotion and context, there is also symbolic recurrence. Sometimes the same symbol appears in different situations: dreams, conversations, movies, objects. This may indicate that the unconscious is trying to draw attention to a specific theme. Repetition in these cases is not random. It is a symbolic resource used by the psyche to awaken consciousness. It is worth remembering that symbols do not have fixed meanings. What is a sign for one person may mean nothing to another. Therefore, the key to interpretation lies in the personal and subjective relationship with the event. What does it awaken in you? What memories or feelings is it connected to? What decisions or reflections does it provoke? It is also important to avoid overinterpretation. Jung made a point of differentiating synchronicity from superstition. Not every coincidence carries a symbolic meaning. The danger lies in seeking forced meaning in everything, which can lead to a distorted reading of reality. The synchronic view is an open view, not an obsessive one. It recognizes the mystery, but does not cling to definitive explanations. One practical way to develop this awareness is through careful observation of your own life. Start paying attention to situations that seem to speak to your inner state. Record dreams, striking thoughts, intuitions, and unusual events. Over time, you will begin to notice patterns, and it is in these patterns that many synchronicities reveal themselves. Another important point, inner silence favors symbolic listening. When we are overloaded with stimuli and constantly distracted, it is more difficult to perceive the subtle signs that life sends us. However, when we cultivate moments of pause, reflection, or contemplation, we create space for the unconscious to manifest itself, and with it synchronicities. Jung saw these manifestations as opportunities to reconnect with forgotten parts of ourselves. Synchronicity is ultimately a bridge between the conscious and the unconscious, between what we know and what is still hidden. And when we notice this bridge forming, we gain access to valuable insights about ourselves, our choices, and the direction of our lives. So the best way to distinguish coincidence from synchronicity is to ask yourself, did this touch me emotionally? Did it happen at a meaningful time? Does it connect with something I've been feeling or thinking? Does it reinforce an intuition, decision, or transformation I'm experiencing? If the answer is yes to most of these questions, you may be facing a sign, not just a random event, but a message from deep within your psyche. And it is precisely at this point that we enter an even deeper dimension, the symbolic meaning of these signs. Because more than identifying a synchronicity, it is necessary to interpret it. And that is what we will talk about in the next chapter, the symbolic meaning. Behind synchronicity, identifying a synchronicity is just the first step. What really transforms this type of experience is its symbolic interpretation. And this is where we go into a deeper layer. What is the event trying to communicate? What aspect of your life is it mirroring? For Jung, synchronicity was not a magical answer or a prediction of the future. It was, above all, a symbolic language of the unconscious, a form of communication that uses images, emotions, and events instead of words. In this language, everything is a metaphor, a number that repeats itself, a phrase spoken by a stranger, an animal that appears repeatedly. All of these can contain messages, as long as we know how to listen sensitively. It is important to remember that the symbol is not literal. It points to something greater, something that cannot be fully explained with logic. A symbol, as Jung said, is the best possible expression of something essentially unknown. In other words, it brings us closer to a meaning that is beyond words. Synchronicity, in this context, acts as a key that opens internal doors that we may have been avoiding or even didn't know existed. Imagine that you are feeling stuck in a repetitive cycle in your life, at work, in relationships, in habits. One day, while you are walking around distractedly, you see a graffiti with the phrase, "The cycle only breaks when you change direction." It stops you in your tracks. It's not just the phrase, it's the moment. It's what you were feeling. It's the feeling that the image was placed there just for you. This is the symbolic value of synchronicity. It reveals the invisible through the visible. Jung believed that these symbolic moments serve as invitations to integration. When something keeps popping up in your life, a symbol, an archetype, a message, it could be that your unconscious is trying to draw attention to a part of you that you've been ignoring. It may be time to make a difficult choice, face a long-held fear, or embrace something you've been avoiding for a long time. In this sense, synchronicity plays a transformative role. It does not solve problems, but rather reveals hidden layers of what we are experiencing. It often appears to reinforce an intuition, confirm a decision, or accelerate a process of change that was already underway, even if unconsciously. Another interesting aspect is that synchronicity does not depend on belief. It can happen to anyone, anywhere, regardless of spirituality, religion, or personal philosophy. What changes is the willingness to interpret the event not as something banal, but as something symbolic. And this is a skill that can be cultivated. The practice of symbolism, in fact, is one of the keys to Jungian thought. Jung saw life as a journey full of hidden meanings, which manifest themselves through universal archetypes: the hero, the shadow, the wise old man, the inner child. When synchronicity appears, it is often associated with one of these archetypes, suggesting that a certain phase of life is calling for a new internal positioning. For example, a person who is maturing emotionally may begin to encounter symbols of transition over and over again: bridges, doors, intersections, paths. These elements, even if they appear in unrelated contexts, such as dreams, movies, or conversations, carry a symbolic pattern. They represent the passage from one stage of life to another. The most important thing to remember is that symbolic meaning is always personal. What represents growth for one person may symbolize fear for another. Therefore, when faced with synchronicity, the most powerful question you can ask yourself is, what does this mean for me at this point in my life? This is the essence of synchronicity. It does not provide ready-made answers. It provokes awareness. It does not dictate the path. It illuminates a possibility. And sometimes all we need to make a decision, change direction, or understand a pain is that symbolic spark that reconnects us with something that was already inside us, waiting to be seen. If you've ever experienced a coincidence that seemed to have a hidden message, share it in the comments. Maybe by putting it into words, you'll find even more meaning in that experience and inspire others to reflect on theirs too. When life changes, synchronicity as an agent of transformation. When we recognize the symbolic value of a synchronicity, something begins to move within us. What once seemed like just a curious event now reveals itself to be part of a larger process, and it is precisely at this point that many of these experiences mark important turning points in the lives of those who experience them. Jung observed in his patients and in himself that synchronicity often appears at times of profound transition. It could be the end of a relationship, the loss of a loved one, an identity crisis, or the desire to radically change one's life. These are periods of instability where the old paths no longer serve, but the new ones are not yet clear. It is in this symbolic void that the signs begin to emerge. These signs are not predictions of the future, but invitations to move. They prompt us to look within and align with what is emerging. Sometimes it is a nudge to make a choice we have been putting off. Other times, it is a subtle warning to slow down and listen more closely to our intuition. A common example, someone who has long felt the desire to change careers but is paralyzed by fear. Then this person starts meeting people who have already made this transition, comes across content about purpose, and receives an unexpected proposal. The events by themselves do not explain the decision, but the symbolic chain can give the courage needed to make it. These experiences do not follow a linear logic. They seem to spring from an invisible intelligence, as if life were weaving a subtle script parallel to our own. And when we are able to perceive this seam, something realigns internally. It is as if the external world is saying, "You are on the right path." Many people report synchronicities that led them to meet important people, begin spiritual journeys, find answers they had been seeking for years, or even move to another country. These stories, although different from each other, share one thing in common: the feeling that the universe intervened at exactly the right moment. But this intervention does not come from outside. It emerges from our own psyche, dialoguing with the world in a symbolic way. Jung saw synchronicity as a response from the self, the deepest, most integrative core of personality. When we are disconnected from it, we lose our sense of direction and purpose. But when we reach out, when we listen to the signs and follow what resonates with authenticity, life begins to respond. Synchronicity in this sense is a symptom of inner alignment. Of course, this alignment does not mean that everything becomes easy or that life enters into a permanent flow of magical events. What changes is the way we interpret and experience events. By recognizing the symbolic dimension of events, we give them a place in our personal narrative. And with that, we stop being victims of chance and become conscious participants in our own story. Transformation, therefore, is not only in what happens, but in how we position ourselves in the face of what happens. A coincidence can go unnoticed or become a turning point, depending on the symbolic listening we apply to it. What transforms is not the event itself, but the meaning we give it. That's why the most powerful synchronicities tend to be those that move us. They don't just impress us, they transform us. And this transformation can be silent or radical, internal or visible. It can come as a simple decision made with confidence or as a complete change of direction. What matters is that when we go through it, we are no longer the same. And although synchronicity is, by definition, a rare and unpredictable phenomenon, it teaches us something essential, that the world is richer, more symbolic and more connected than it appears, and that sometimes all we need is a single meaningful moment to see life through different eyes. With this in mind, we move on to another dimension of the synchronic experience, how science and skepticism view this phenomenon, and what this reveals about the limits of reason when it comes to symbolic experience. Skepticism, science, and the value of personal experience. Despite its transformative impact on many people's lives, synchronicity is often met with skepticism from mainstream science, and understandably so. Modern science is based on principles of repetition, causality, and measurement, and by definition, synchronicity falls outside these criteria. It cannot be predicted, replicated in a laboratory, or explained by direct cause and effect relationships. Jung knew this. He did not try to prove synchronicity as if it were a mathematical formula. Instead, he presented it as a subjective, symbolic, and meaningful phenomenon whose validity lies not in numbers, but in the experience of the person living it. For many scientists, this is not enough, and methodologically, they are right. But the problem arises when we assume that only that which can be measured exists. In this model, everything that is subtle, symbolic, or deeply human ends up being discarded, and with it, the richness of inner experience is devalued. Jung proposed a complementary view. Reason is essential, but it is not everything. There are forms of knowledge that do not follow Cartesian logic, but which are still valid. Art, spirituality, dreams, and of course, synchronicity are part of this broader field, where value lies in the lived meaning, not just in external proof. Interestingly, science itself is beginning to find gaps in this paradigm. Quantum physics, for example, challenges traditional concepts of time, space, and causality. Some physicists, such as Wolfgang Pauli himself, with whom Jung exchanged long correspondences, saw synchronicity as a clue that mind and matter might be more interconnected than we imagine. Although this bridge between science and symbolism remains controversial, the important thing is to recognize that synchronicity belongs to another language. It does not require blind faith, but rather open listening, a willingness to welcome what touches us, even when we cannot explain it. And this is deeply human. The most curious thing is that, even without believing in the concept, many people recognize that they have already experienced synchronic moments. They may not call it by that name, nor seek symbolic explanations, but they describe the same feeling. It was strange. It seemed like it had a meaning. And perhaps deep down, that is the most important thing. What makes sense to you is what transforms. If you've come this far and this content resonates with your experience, please leave a like. This helps us to continue bringing you deep reflections with respect for the subjectivity and symbolism that each person carries. Understanding synchronicity is just the beginning. Real change happens when we begin to live with greater symbolic awareness, paying attention not only to what is happening, but to what it might mean. Developing this listening is a practice, a way of being in the world with greater presence, sensitivity, and openness. The first step is to pay close attention to your own internal states. When we are emotionally intense, whether due to pain, doubt, desire, or transformation, we are more receptive to synchronous experiences. At these times, the unconscious is more active, seeking symbolic ways to manifest itself. The tip is simple. Pay attention to how you are inside before interpreting what is happening outside. Another valuable habit is to record dreams, intuitions, and remarkable coincidences. When you write them down, you create a symbolic timeline of your journey. Many synchronicities only reveal their meaning after a few days or even weeks. Keeping this record helps you notice connections that, in the heat of the moment, might go unnoticed. It is also important to develop the ability to listen symbolically. This means looking at events with curiosity, without seeking immediate explanations. Ask yourself, what might this be reflecting in me? What part of my life is asking for attention now? Has this symbol appeared before? What does it represent to me? Living with synchronic awareness is not about constantly waiting for signs from the universe. It is rather a way of being more connected to yourself, to your intuition, to your feelings, and to the direction your life seems to be taking. When you listen, what is meaningful tends to naturally stand out. Another fundamental practice is to reduce internal noise. Amidst notifications, constant distractions, and excessive stimulation, subtle signals lose their place. Creating breaks in your routine, cultivating silence, walking without, headphones observing the world around you, all of this helps you perceive what is happening beyond the surface. Along this journey, you may realize that the world is not as random as it seems, that certain encounters, phrases, images, or situations appear at just the right moment, as if they had been placed in your path by something greater. And perhaps that is exactly what is needed. Or perhaps, more important than tasting something, is to embrace the experience with reverence and presence. Synchronicity invites us to live with more meaning, to get out of automatic mode, to see the invisible in the details, and, most importantly, to walk with the feeling that there is a symbolic thread running through our story, even when we can't see the whole picture. If this reflection inspired you, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel. Here, we continue exploring themes that combine psychology, symbols, self-knowledge, and the questions that really matter. And who knows, along the way you might recognize some more synchronicities that were going unnoticed.